Originally, this presentation was supposed to have two people. My colleague Graham Buchel. Fortunately, he could not make it today due to unforeseen circumstances, so you get me. My name is Hudson, as Adam has introduced, and I am a librarian at Wayne State University. I work in the area of digital publishing. And so that involves a specialized unit within the library system where we deal with a variety of different responsibilities, including working with our university press and traditional publishing efforts, as well as website publishing of digital content, and then the area of digital collections. I'll be talking more about the digital collections responsibility that I deal with. And so we titled this Preparing for Preservation. And the reason we did that is because for the past year and a half, we've been working to develop a object repository for a lot of our digital collections and other things that would come up with it. And we've been using the software Fedora Commons. And during this past year and a half, we've learned a lot, and we've had pretty good success in it. And what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to replace an outgoing system that we have running a platform called DLXS. And it's served its time. It's been a useful product, but it's aging for a variety of reasons, including its content management, just how it handles digital objects, as well as how it displays it. So the display is looking a little bit aged, and and every so often you got to refresh your software. So that's what we're doing, and we're trying to use a software, Fedora Commons, that perhaps will allow for a little bit longer-term management of objects and variety of objects. And so for the time that we've been working on this, we've been focused primarily on access. We want to transfer a lot of our digital collections over from our legacy software into our new one. So people can see them. They can see them in a nicer, newer way. And so we've got to a point that we're about to have a beta release. Maybe it's not 1.0, but like 0.10 or 0.01. So it's very early beta, but it's something that we're getting towards. And so we have this access system that we've been focusing on. And you think, well, what's the deal with preservation? Well, so we have our front end looking like we want it. And now we decided, well, there's access, but there's also preservation. We got to make sure that we have an object repository, and we have that stuff in there, but what kind of things are we actually doing that preserve it, that, that actually keep track of it in useful and standardized ways of preservation? And so we started thinking about that, and we discovered that when we were looking at preservation, we realized we'd already done a bit of preservation work through building our access system. And we thought, well, how do we do that? What's going on here? What happened? So this presentation is going to kind of tease these ideas of preservation and access. So part two. You see a Venn diagram, and the thing is, the next two slides should be taken with a grain of salt. They're not meant to be something that you should take for truth. It's more of a thought experiment. As we realized, that we had focused on access and we had already done a bit of preservation, we had to kind of tease these differences between access and preservation. You hear both of them usually used interchangeably or in some kind of context that indicates some meaning, and so we were wondering, well, how did this come about? How do we actually do some preservation while we made our front-end system? And so you can see we have some quotes here, some nice ones that kind of encapsulate formalized views of digital preservation. One from digitalpreservation.gov says, digital preservation is the active management of digital content over time to ensure ongoing access. So the things you want to look here is where do they mention preservation, where do they mention the word access, that kind of relationship. Another one says, digital preservation combines policy, strategies, and actions that ensure access to digital content over time. And another one says, well, most agree that it's a set of activities aimed towards ensuring access to digital materials over time. So there seems to be this fundamental assumption in digital preservation. You can't really access what hasn't been preserved, but perhaps you can preserve something without really accessing it. And you think, well, where did this come from? Well, as many presenters have already mentioned, physical media preservation, is definitely different from digital preservation. Perhaps this kind of assumption is a holdover from preserving these physical materials, where the method of access is kind of baked into the preservation. When you go and look at a book or a scroll, mostly you can use your eyeballs and you can see the thing actually there. So you interact with the physical media that's being preserved very simply, and so it's kind of baked in there. As I said, there's always exceptions here. This is not a rule. There are plenty of physical objects that you can't access just straight up. You need technology or some type of mediation to render them, like wax cylinders, books that are too fragile to flip or too fragile to open. You have to figure that out. But the fact is, access has often been a bit more straightforward with the kinds of physical materials that libraries and archives have we're really preserving. But here I am talking about the preservation of digital information, and there's a physical component with digital information, digital preservation. It's quite literally composed of little magnetic pieces of metal registering on and off if you have a hard drive, or it's a true or false, or 1 or 0, and whatever kind of binary system you want to use, since that's what we finally settled on as a way of encoding digital information. But it's more than just that kind of physical on and off switch. It's unless you're really super cool and you can read binary, usually you can't decipher it by any kind of means with your eyeballs. You have to have some kind of mediation, and it's really just kind of an opaque string of 1s and 0s, and until it's kind of actualized, until it's type of rendered through access. And the quotes here, they seem to suggest that access is somehow removed from preservation, and that it's some kind of byproduct or end goal, but maybe it's not exactly part of the machinery. And the second and third quote here, they define digital preservation as a collection of things working in unison to ensure some type of access. And so if preservation is a set of actions ensuring access over time, isn't access in a way successful preservation over time, or preservation in and of itself? It seems conceivable that when you're pursuing access, you'll organically kind of result in some type of preservation activity, and by virtue of it being the ultimate goal of preservation. So the thing is, well, what happens when we kind of approach digital preservation not as like a series of activities that kind of result in access, but include access equally at each step of the way. So here's some more quotes, and here's yet another circle, but instead of having 2 circles, it just has a big question marks. And so these first 2 quotes are from the most recent MDiP, Mid-Michigan Digital Preservation Practitioners meeting, which was excellent. Thank you for GVSU for doing this. And one great quote was, mentioning that use and access are 1/2 of preservation. And in a later quote, someone said, I think many of us would agree that access is the more difficult half. And here's not really a quote, but it's probably something that's true that insert a file name, old Word document, Word star file, something won't open. And that first one, the use and access are 1/2 of preservation. Hold on, let me get to my house. So when we think back to that original assumption that we can preserve something without actually accessing it, it's interesting to hear people say, and to experience the same thing while managing and curating digital collections, that access is 1/2 of preservation. And maybe it's the integral half. In practicality, we can kind of tease parts of preservation access. We can look at bit level fixity checks, we can look at redundancy and geographic separation of copies and all that stuff as preservation. And then, we can think of image viewing software, software to play audio, software applications to render text. Those are access. But, the thing is to remember here that this is just really a thought experiment. This is me trying to tease together these parts. And, if we come up with anything comprehensible, that's good. And if we don't, that's fine too. And so all this is to really just indicate that, when you access digital information now and down the road, it's challenging, and it's more than simply just preserving the ones and the zeros. And so, what you have to do is you need to just consider that maybe this idea of access and preservation is not so, simply encapsulated in preservation being the way of ensuring ongoing access. Maybe there are some, ways that you can actually ensure preservation through doing access activities. And we think we've, actually done a couple of them. And so this is our third part. It says kind of boldly, triumph, preservation through access, in which we conquered NDSA's levels of digital preservation one at a time. I should have put a couple of qualifiers in there. First, in which we conquered some of NDSA's levels of preservation, maybe. And the first, if you don't know about the NDSA levels of digital preservation, first, it's a chart. Second, they're really hard to do. They're not meant to be easy. And, I took this, and I don't really think you can accomplish them in order. They have these different levels of how you do things, and I don't know if you've looked over those at any time. I think that these levels are a little bit hard to actually accomplish. So let's see if this link works. And if it does, we'll be able to look at the chart. Okay, and this is a copy of levels of digital preservation. We have 4 different levels for 5 different areas. And so they have nice ways in which you can, if you accomplish all of level 1 of all these things, maybe you can move on to 2, and so on and so forth. And so they have things like 2 complete copies that are not co-located. For fixity, check file fixity on ingest, create fixity info if it wasn't provided with content, metadata, so on and so forth. And so we think we've done a few of these. First one that we think we've done through the building of our access system was dealing with metadata level 3, which is storing standard technical and descriptive metadata. So when we were building our front end, one of the things we decided we had to do was we had to have descriptive metadata, because when you search for something, you need keywords to search off, keywords to key off of, and when you get some type of search results, you need a facet list usually on the side of your screen that says, okay, here's some of the date fields, here's some of the subject terms, here are the collections that you're going to find your stuff in. And so by simply doing that, we had to create mods that encapsulates each of the collections as well as the items, so item level and collection level metadata. And so this is mainly descriptive metadata. And when we looked on the levels of digital preservation, well, we already had that. Another thing is technical metadata. And we haven't done all of that, but we started doing this. And we did this unknowingly, because when you go to an item on our access system, the way the computer is able to know what it is that it's going to give you is because of the technical metadata. So there's a variety of things you could look at on our access system. You could look at pictures, you could look at collections of pictures, you could look at videos. Pretty soon you'll be able to look at audio. And so the access system basically needs to know how to interpret this if you ask for it. And the way it's going to do that is by knowing the MIME type. The MIME type tells us things like, okay, hey, this is an image, or this is an audio file. Okay, this is a certain type of audio file. And the access system says, okay, oh, this is an image, cool. Let's go render it with this piece of access software. And by by having that already built into our access system, well, we started with our technical, at least some very basic technical metadata. File formats. Well, related to what I just said there in terms of MIME type, the access system will have no clue how to render anything unless it knows what kind of file it is. And with file formats level 2, you have to have an inventory of file formats in use. So just to be able to render the things on the web page, we have to know what stuff we're dealing with. And voila, we've done that. Is it perfect? No, but it's definitely seems to be working. Another thing is information security. This is always a big concern when you're building an access system or preservation system or something in between. With level 1, it says to identify who has read-write, move, and delete authorization to individual files, and restrict access or restrict authorization to individual files. Well, so this has to deal a bit with our client-server architecture. And this kind of security was already built in to our access system because of the way we have things set up. I'm presuming that this type of guideline assumed some type of dark archive or an archive that was perhaps generally inaccessible to people or outside users. And so those restrictions would have to be built in to manage kind of its security, its ingest. And the way we have our infrastructure set up, it's not really the same way. We don't have a dark archive. Our access system actively queries our repository whenever we need content. So a user can say, okay, I want a picture. And our access system, our web pages go and say, okay, let's go grab this picture from our repository. And it goes and grabs it and serves it up. And so, basically it's requesting content from our preservation system all the time. And because we have this system set up where a client can essentially request content from the back end, we had to build in the types of restrictions to make this system worthy of showing to the public. So you couldn't go and randomly delete files, or you couldn't go and grab the wrong files, because the the way systems are set up, if you can access it through HTTP, there are certain protocols that allow you to grab things, to delete things, to update things, and you don't want that. And so with our, when we did building our access system, we had to build in those restrictions, and so we already had that type of preservation activity built in. Similarly, with information security level 3, it has you maintain logs of who performed what actions on files, including deletions and preservation. Well, due to the fact that our access system and preservation systems are in some way inextricably linked, we have web server logs that tell you, well, this IP just went and grabbed this file. Okay, this person went and tried to go and access content they weren't supposed to. This person went and wrote a malicious code that went and tried to do something to it. So our access system already kind of manages that. It already tells us what type of logs, logging what type of actions people have been doing. And we've also built in specialized logging scripts too that keep track of these activities as well through our access system. So, since the access system deals with our preservation system, we know who's doing what. And really, that's about it. That's all I have. So, if there are any questions, feel free to entertain them. If they're not, thank you. Yeah.
I don't know if a question might come out at the end. I'm not sure. We'll see. Cool. I really liked this may not be surprising. I really liked your kind of thought experiment in the question, in the preservation and access. And it's the kind of thing that I've been thinking a lot about too. Because I work in physical collections and because I work in digital collections, and that within digital preservation, I'm under the impression that access increases in digital collections. Access increases the likelihood of preservation. In physical collections, access in many ways decreases the likelihood of preservation. Mm-hmm. Because access is in physical preservation, access is always to some level damaging.
Right.
Whereas in digital access always, I mean, more than likely will increase either likelihood of multiple copies and things like that. So,
right.
but yeah, then I liked what you showed how your access, your doing access achieved preservation, even though you were
right.
not. But that's not very. I mean, but that correlation doesn't really happen in the physical
right.
physical collections in the same way. So yeah, it's a really rethinking of what they're related. I mean, yeah, they have kind of different relationships. So I guess there is no question, but.
Well, I agree. Yes. And when we came up with this, it was really hard to figure out that kind of dichotomy and think about it because, well, I'm telling you, for the past year and a half, we've been trying to make sure we're plunking physical or digital objects into a data store and then making something that looks pretty. We haven't been thinking about, well, what's the relationship between preservation and access, and have we been performing these diligently? And so to actually have to tease out these and acknowledge that, that correlation and make perhaps a changing correlation, it's been an interesting one. Yes?
I'm not sure I have a question either, Cole. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
At one of the NDSA annual meetings, a gentleman, and I remember him saying, I don't know who said it, but he said we have to bake in preservation into our processes. And that's really what we're talking about, that we have to, that has to be one of the check boxes, and it has to be part of a process development. And I think our National Archivist said when he was here that it takes, even in the National Archives email system for preservation, it took 3 keystrokes to save email to say this is important, and it takes 1 keystroke to delete it. So we've got a problem there inherently in just the extra effort. So that's why I think that your presentation and your kind of attempt at getting us to think more about it is so critical, because we're kind of backwards, inside out, and in its infancy all at the same time. And so it's really difficult for us, and especially when you look at, like you're working with Fedora, which has so many pieces parts,
right.
And then you've got to have an overlay of access and overlay of preservation, right. And how does it all work together? It's incredibly complicated, which is why we need to all talk. Yeah.
Right. As you say, with that specific Fedora software, at least, its access is not really. It's not an access system. It's a way to go and model objects in a digital environment and store them on a system that will keep track of them in some certain ways. And then you have to use certain built-in protocols to build some kind of system where people can actually see the stuff that you have. Yeah. And yeah, it's incredibly complex. Right. Yeah.